Les bâtiments représentent près de 80% de la consommation totale d'électricité dans la région et cette consommation ne cesse de croître.
Indeed, buildings represent nearly 80% of the total consumption of electricity in the region, and this consumption is constantly growing.
La mise en place de politiques publiques efficaces qui s'inscrivent dans la durée est un facteur essentiel à la réduction de cette consommation.
The implementation of effective public policy that is sustainable is an essential factor in reducing this consumption.
Jusqu'en 2011, nos constructions étaient fortement inspirées d'un modèle européen continental, tout à fait inadapté à nos latitudes.
Until 2011, our constructions were strongly inspired by a continental European model, quite unsuited to our latitudes.
Aujourd'hui, en 2023, je suis heureuse de dire que la Guadeloupe a su innover dans ce domaine en établissant en 2009 une réglementation thermique du bâtiment qui peut désormais inspirer nos chers voisins caribéens.
Today, in 2023, I am happy to say that Guadeloupe has been able to innovate in this field by establishing in 2009 a thermal building regulation, which can now inspire our dear Caribbean neighbors.
Cette réglementation locale exige désormais que toutes les constructions neuves répondent à des normes de performance énergétique élevées et en encourage également la rénovation énergétique des bâtiments existants.
This local regulation currently requires that all new constructions meet high energy performance standards and also encourages the energy renovation of existing buildings.
Cette initiative est pour nous une réussite, car elle a permis de diminuer significativement la consommation d'énergie dans les bâtiments en Guadeloupe.
For us, this initiative is a success as it has significantly reduced energy consumption in buildings in Guadeloupe.
Avec un impact positif sur le confort des usagers, sur l'environnement, en réduisant les émissions de gaz à effet de serre et aussi sur l'activité économique locale avec la création d'expertises nouvelles et de nouveaux emplois dans le secteur de la construction et de la rénovation énergétique.
With a positive impact on the comfort of users, so inhabitants, on the environment by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and also on local economy activity with the creation of new expertise and new jobs in the construction and energy renovation sectors.
Cela impose bien sûr un portage politique important pour accompagner un changement de mentalité, une prise de conscience collective et surtout des mesures parfois contraignantes pour généraliser ces pratiques vertueuses à toute une île et peut-être demain pour toute la Caraïbe.
This requires, of course, an important political support to accompany a change of mentality, a collective awareness, and above all, measures that are sometimes restrictive to generalize these virtuous practices to an entire island and perhaps tomorrow to the entire Caribbean.
C'est pourquoi nous organisons humblement ce temps d'échange en impliquant les acteurs locaux, les promoteurs immobiliers, les architectes et les citoyens, et afin de faire de la performance énergétique des bâtiments une réalité au bénéfice de tous.
That is why we humbly organize this exchange involving local actors, real estate developers, architects, and citizens in order to make the energy performance of buildings a reality for the benefit of all.
C'est en ce sens que la région Guadeloupe conduit un projet de coopération en partenariat avec l'Agence française de la transition écologique, l'ADEME, le Bureau français de recherche géologique et minière, le BRGM, et surtout l'Organisation des États de la Caraïbe orientale.
It is in this sense that the Guadeloupe region is leading a cooperation project in partnership with the French Agency of Ecological Transition, the ADEME, the French Office of Geological and Mining Research, the BRGM, and above all, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States.
Ce projet de coopération intitulé Transition énergétique dans la Caraïbe, TEC, a permis ses objectifs principaux de cibler et de préfigurer la réalisation d'opérations pilotes pour des bâtiments neufs ou des rénovations et de contribuer à l'émergence des marchés régionaux au bénéfice du plus grand nombre.
This cooperation project, entitled Energy Transition in the Caribbean, TEC, has among its main objectives to target and prefigure the realization of pilot operations for new buildings or renovations and to contribute to the emergence of a regional market for the benefit of the greatest number.
Des outils sont à votre disposition tels qu'un guide de retour d'expérience sur la réglementation thermique du bâtiment en Guadeloupe. Ce document à destination des pays de la Caraïbe est associé à une étude de la performance énergétique des bâtiments tertiaires dans les États membres de l'OECS.
Tools are at your disposal, such as a feedback guide on the thermal regulation of the building in Guadeloupe. This document for the Caribbean countries is associated with a study of the energy performance of the tertiary buildings in the OECS member states.
Enfin, au nom de la région Guadeloupe, je souhaite réaffirmer notre engagement dans le développement d'opportunités d'affaires pour les entreprises de la Caraïbe au service d'un développement économique local et aussi un soutien majeur dans la trajectoire de résilience de nos îles. Je vous souhaite à tous un bon webinaire.
Finally, on behalf of the Guadeloupe region, I would like to reiterate our commitment to the development of business opportunities for Caribbean companies in the service of local economic development, and also a major support in the resiliency trajectory of our islands. I wish you all a very good webinar.
Thank you very much, President, for your welcoming remarks. So before we move to the webinar, please allow me to introduce you the agenda for today's webinar.
Donc, avant de continuer, permettez-moi de présenter l'ordre du jour de notre webinaire.
So we'll start with a short presentation of the energy transition in the Caribbean project.
On va commencer avec une intervention courte sur la transition énergétique dans le cadre du projet Caraïbes.
Then we will move to the panel discussion. We will start with a presentation regarding the building energy efficiency regulation for the benefit of Caribbean countries based on Guadeloupe's case study.
Après, on va passer à une table ronde sur l'efficacité énergétique des bâtiments, la réglementation au profit des pays des Caraïbes, basée sur l'étude de cas de Guadeloupe.
After that, we will have a short question and answer session.
Ensuite, on va avoir une séance de questions et réponses toute courte.
Then our next speaker will talk about energy efficiency in buildings within the OECS.
Après, on va parler de l'efficacité énergétique dans les bâtiments au sein de l'OECO. Pardon.
After Mrs. Barnier will give a small talk on building energy efficiency regulation in Guadeloupe, evolution of practices of construction professionals.
Après, Madame Barnier va faire une intervention sur la réglementation de l'efficacité énergétique des bâtiments en Guadeloupe, sur l'évolution des pratiques des professionnels de la construction.
Then we will have another question and answer session. Sorry.
Ensuite, une autre séance de questions et réponses.
Finally, Mrs. VANOUKIA will close the webinar.
Et après, Madame VANOUKIA va donner des remarques de clôture de notre webinaire. Merci.
So our panelists members include several experts.
On a plusieurs experts dans notre panel d'intervenants.
So the first one is Mr. Lionel Bertrand, who is the Deputy Director of Energy and Environment Unit at the CSTB.
Le premier intervenant, c'est Monsieur Lionel Bertrand, directeur adjoint d'énergie et d'environnement.
Then the second panelist is Mr. Julien EVARISTE, who is an energy engineer at the Regional Council of Guadeloupe.
Ensuite, il y a Monsieur Julien EVARISTE, qui est ingénieur d'énergie, qui représente le Conseil régional de Guadeloupe.
Our third speaker is Mrs. Barnier. She's the manager of Green Affaires Antilles Guyane Company.
Ensuite, il y a Madame Céline Barnier, qui est une directrice et responsable des affaires écologiques.
And we have also Dr. Curtis Boodoo, who is a consulting engineer on behalf of the OECS Commission.
Après, il y a Monsieur Curtis Boodoo, qui est un ingénieur conseiller dans la commission de OECE.
And finally, we have Mrs. Marie-Charlotte. She is the ETC project manager at the ADEME.
Et puis, il y a Madame Marie-Charlotte, qui est le chef de projet chez ADEME.
And as myself, I will be the MC for today's webinar. And my name is Raïssa, and I am an energy engineer at the Regional Council of Guadeloupe.
Et moi, je suis la modératrice de notre webinaire aujourd'hui. Je m'appelle Raïssa EUSTACHE et je travaille également avec le Conseil régional de la Guadeloupe.
Thank you.
Merci.
So now, let's switch in French. Donc, nous allons vous présenter le projet Transition énergétique dans la Caraïbe.
So we will now switch to English, and then we want to present to you the energy transition in the Caribbean project.
Donc, le webinaire d'aujourd'hui s'inscrit dans ce projet de coopération.
Today's webinary is in the framework of the ETC project cooperation.
Donc, pour vous expliquer un peu le contexte de ce projet, donc, il faut savoir que la plupart des États caribéens dépendent fortement des combustibles fossiles pour leurs besoins énergétiques.
Just to put you into context, you have to know that most of the Caribbean countries rely on fossil fuel energy.
Et pour faire face à ce défi, les pays de la Caraïbe ont décidé de se tourner vers les énergies renouvelables.
Since we are in an energy crisis situation, we wanted to overcome this challenge by turning our focus more to renewable energies.
Donc la question qui se pose, c'est comment accélérer la transition énergétique dans les États de la Caraïbe.
So the question that we posed is, what is there to be done? How to manage and do this energy transition in the Caribbean region?
Et donc l'enjeu du projet transition énergétique dans la Caraïbe, c'est de pouvoir répondre à cette question.
So what was at stake with this project was precisely to find solutions to this challenge, to this transition.
Donc, en promouvant la coopération en matière d'efficacité énergétique entre la Guadeloupe et les États de la Caraïbe.
First of all, by fostering synergies and to help ways of cooperation in becoming energy efficient in a cooperation framework with between the Guadeloupe and the other Caribbean states.
En renforçant la résilience des systèmes énergétiques insulaires.
In reinforcing insulation systems in building establishments.
Et l'objectif aussi de ce projet, c'est de créer un marché régional de la transition énergétique en identifiant les opportunités d'investissement dans toute la Caraïbe.
And thirdly, to create and establish an international energy market by identifying investment opportunities in the Caribbean region.
Ce projet a été initié par la région Guadeloupe et est mis en œuvre en partenariat avec l'OECO, l'ADEME et le BRGM.
This project has been so the leader of this project was the Guadeloupe region, and namely the Regional Council of Guadeloupe, with the cooperation of OECS, ADEME, and BRGM.
Il s'agit d'un projet de coopération qui s'articule autour de 3 thématiques.
We had 3 main topics or pillars to this project.
Donc, le premier pilier, c'est la performance énergétique des bâtiments.
First is the energy performance of buildings.
Le deuxième pilier, c'est l'énergie propre dans les transports.
Second pillar was the clean energy in transport.
Et le troisième pilier, c'est le développement régional de la ressource géothermique.
And third pillar was the development of geothermal resource.
Donc, si vous souhaitez en savoir plus sur le projet, n'hésitez pas à consulter notre site internet qui est affiché sur la slide.
If you want to know about this project, please feel free to consult the website of the project. The link you can find on the slide, and you can find much more information about this.
Donc, comme vous l'avez compris, l'objectif de ce webinaire, c'est de se concentrer sur le premier pilier, qui est la performance énergétique des bâtiments, notamment dans la Caraïbe.
So, as you know, the first and main topic of this webinar is the first pillar, namely the energy performance or energy efficiency of buildings in the Caribbean region.
Donc, plusieurs études ont été effectuées dans le cadre de ce projet, et notamment dans le cadre de la thématique performance énergétique des bâtiments dans la Caraïbe. Aujourd'hui, donc, nous avons Monsieur Lionel Bertrand ainsi que Monsieur Julien EVARISTE qui vous feront la restitution d'un des livrables clés.
There have been several studies that were done in this topic, namely about the energy efficiency or energy performance of buildings in the Caribbean region. And you will have 2 presenters, Mr. Bertrand and Mr. EVARISTE, who will present on the outcomes of these studies.
Donc, le premier livrable que nous avons réalisé dans le cadre de ce projet, c'est un guide de retour d'expérience sur la réglementation thermique de Guadeloupe à destination des pays caribéens.
The first such work that will be presented is a feedback study on Caribbean buildings energy efficiency.
Et le deuxième livrable qui vous sera présenté très rapidement par ma collègue Madame Marie-Charlotte, c'est une étude de la performance énergétique des bâtiments tertiaires dans les États membres de l'OECO.
And then we will hear a short presentation by my colleague, Madame Marie-Charlotte, about the energy performance of tertiary buildings in the member states of the OECS countries.
Donc, sans plus tarder, j'invite Madame Marie-Charlotte à présenter très rapidement cette étude.
Merci Raïssa. Donc, tu as bien présenté, en plus de cette étude de ce qui a été réalisé au cours d'expérience sur les RTG, nous avons aussi réalisé un guide. Nous avons aussi réalisé un guide, pardon, pour donner en fait des conseils aux gestionnaires de bâtiments et aux professionnels du secteur du bâtiment.
And with this, I will give the floor to my colleague, Madame Marie-Charlotte. And yes, hello everyone. And I would like to tell you that we've also made guidelines on for building managers on the findings of the energy savings in OEC public and commercial buildings.
Ce guide a été construit sur l'étude, en tout cas EPTB en anglais, donc l'étude sur la performance énergétique des bâtiments tertiaires, donc tertiaires publics et commerciaux principalement, qui a permis notamment de réaliser 31 visites et audits de bâtiments dans des États membres représentatifs que sont en Guyane, Antilles et la Dominique.
This handbook is based on the energy performance of tertiary buildings, or EPTB, with the English acronym, which is the study carried out by ADEME and within the ETC project. And we were able to make 31 visits and audits in buildings in the 3 representative member states of the region, namely Anguilla, Antigua, and Dominica.
Donc, le document principal est constitué en tout cas d'un bref résumé de ces études, mais aussi un rappel, un succinct rappel de qu'est-ce que le fonctionnement en tout cas thermique d'un bâtiment, et 16 fiches actions sur des mesures qui pourraient être prises par les gestionnaires de bâtiments ou les professionnels du secteur pour améliorer la performance énergétique des bâtiments. Donc, je ne m'étendrai pas trop sur le sujet puisque ça fera l'objet, en l'occurrence, d'un webinaire qui présentera en tout cas en détail les éléments et le contenu du guide. Voilà.
So this document consists of a brief overview of the energy performance of tertiary buildings in the OECS countries, a reminder of the thermal functioning of buildings, and 16 energy efficiency measures. But I will not go into details into these subjects because this webinar is the main topic of this webinar is not this handbook.
Merci beaucoup, Marine. Donc, sans plus tarder, nous allons commencer avec nos 2 premiers intervenants. Donc, en l'occurrence, M. Julien EVARISTE et ensuite M. Lionel Bertrand.
Thank you, Marine. And now we will start with, or proceed with our 2 main presenters. First, Mr. Julien EVARISTE, and then Mr. Lionel Bertrand.
Pour des questions de timing, toutes les présentations seront faites en anglais. Donc, M. Julien EVARISTE fera sa présentation en français, mais ensuite, toutes les présentations seront en anglais. Il n'y aura pas d'interprétation de l'anglais vers le français, puisque sinon, cela reviendrait à doubler la durée du webinaire. Donc, on s'excuse par avance pour les difficultés, les problèmes techniques que nous avons rencontrés pour l'interprétation.
And for timing reasons and to be able to keep with the time limits of this webinar, the presentations will be held in English without French interpretation, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to fit into the timing of this webinar. We apologize in advance for this inconvenience. It's due to technical issues for which we were unable to provide simultaneous interpretation. So you will hear the presentations in English.
Donc, Julien, tu peux commencer en français. Donc là, il y aura l'interprétation en anglais. Mais après, dès que les intervenants parleront en anglais, il n'y aura plus d'interprétation.
So Julien, he will start in French and there will be interpretation to English, and then the other presenters will continue in English.
Bonjour à tous, merci Raïssa. Donc, comme évoqué, je suis Julien, EVARISTE, donc ingénieur au service énergie de la région. Et je vais débuter par une introduction donc, du contexte caribéen, forcément le même que celui de la Guadeloupe.
So hello everyone, and thank you Raïssa for the introduction. So yes, as you said, I represent the Regional Council of Guadeloupe, and I want to just present to you a little bit the Caribbean building context.
Donc, le premier postulat étant que des bâtiments utilisent une quantité significative d'énergie, notamment en lien direct avec l'utilisation de la climatisation.
So the buildings use a significant amount of energy in the Caribbean. Désolé Julien, est-ce que vous pouvez vous rapprocher un peu du microphone parce que c'est un peu difficile de comprendre avec des bruits. Oui.
Oui. Donc le deuxième postulat est lui donc que le climat est à la fois chaud et humide, ce qui oriente la réflexion sur la mise en œuvre de mesures d'efficacité énergétique.
So the second point to the context is that the climate here is hot and humid at the same time in this region, which poses challenges for energy efficiency building design.
Le troisième étant que les différents décisionnaires peuvent encourager donc le développement de mesures d'efficacité énergétique à travers des actions incitatives ou à travers des réglementations.
And thirdly is that the decision makers can encourage energy efficient construction through incentives or regulations, and that is what we try to support.
Et enfin, donc tout l'enjeu principal du présent webinaire est de présenter l'expérience de la Guadeloupe, une expérience portant sur 10 ans d'animation et d'évolution d'une réglementation thermique dédiée aux bâtiments de la Guadeloupe, la RTG.
And fourthly, that the main takeaways from this project is that we really gain valuable insights and can learn from Guadeloupe's 10 years experience in implementing an energy efficiency regulation for buildings, which could benefit the Caribbean region.
Donc, pour décrire ces diverses évolutions, la présente slide décrit donc chronologiquement donc le déploiement et l'évolution de la RTG.
So when we are trying to describe the evolution of this topic, this slide presents the chronological development of the RTG.
L'origine de cet outil réglementaire provient d'un constat simple. En 2008, il n'existait pas de réglementation dédiée au département d'outre-mer. Constat qui a également été souligné par la feuille de route de l'énergie régionale, donc le PREUR.
So despite the European directive before 2008, there was no energy efficiency regulation for French overseas territories. Guadeloupe's energy roadmap called PREUR is the thing that is taking its place.
Ensuite, en 2009, a vu l'émergence de la RT ADEME, donc réglementation thermique acoustique et aération des départements d'outre-mer. Cependant, cette réglementation qui visait donc des obligations de moyens a été mal reçue par les professionnels du secteur du bâtiment, donc du territoire.
After this, in 2009, we saw the emergence of the state regulation called RTA-ADOM. However, this was not well received because of obligations that it placed on the professionals of the construction sector.
Faisant suite à ce constat, la région a lancé des travaux pour élaborer une réglementation thermique en concertation avec les acteurs du du secteur, donc à la fois les bureaux d'études, les architectes, les constructeurs de maisons individuelles, visant des obligations de résultat, donc de performance.
After this, the region launched a thermal regulation in consultation with the different actors of the sector, and there was an obligation on results.
Cette première version de la RTG a été publiée en 2011 et vise à augmenter l'efficacité énergétique globale des bâtiments plutôt que la mise en œuvre de mesures spécifiques.
So in 2011, the first version of the RTG saw the light, and it was actually a first version, and it was focusing more on the global regulation instead of pointing out specific particular performance goals.
Donc, cette publication de la RTG a été suivie donc, par la montée en compétence des acteurs à travers notamment des certifications afin de qualifier les différents professionnels à même de réaliser les calculs.
After the publishing of this first version of the RTG, we followed up by a training for the different actors of the sector. So, for example, we introduced certifications and processes in order to teach them how to make the calculations that will lead to the result we require.
Ensuite, en 2013, a vu donc la première évolution de la RTG, donc la RTG V2, toujours dans le même schéma, concertation avec les acteurs du secteur, publication et montée en compétences.
And in 2013, the second version of the RTG appeared. It was published the same way as previously. So first we launched a consultation process, then we introduced the regulation, which was followed up by a certain number of training sessions to bring the different stakeholders up to speed.
Et plus récemment, donc, les travaux pour élaborer la RTG donc V3, donc la dernière évolution à date de la RTG, a débuté par une enquête auprès des acteurs du monde professionnel du bâtiment.
And most recently, we are working on the V3, so the third version of the RTG. We have launched a survey among the stakeholders of the construction sector.
Enquête qui a ensuite mené toujours sur le même schéma, donc la concertation auprès des professionnels du bâtiment, la publication donc, de la troisième évolution de la RTG, donc la RTG P3, pour ensuite la montée en compétence des différents acteurs, toujours sur le même schéma, formation, certification et...
And this will follow the same timeline and the same roadmap as previously. So after the consultation is done, we're going to publish the regulation, and then we will follow it up by a number of training sessions so that the professionals of the construction industry are up to date on what the regulation entails.
Donc, je vais maintenant laisser la main donc, à M. Lionel Bertrand, qui va continuer cette présentation, toujours sur le retour d'expérience de la RTG.
And now I will give the floor to Mr. Lionel Bertrand, who is going to keep talking about the RTG and share with you further details on this interesting concept.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lionel Bertrand. I'm working in the CSTB, which is a Scientific and Technical Center for Building, France, which is a public research center. And I'm deputy manager of its energy environment department. And currently I work as a specialist consultant for the Regional Council of Guadeloupe. So first of all, let's have a look at this chart, which is an overview of the regulatory scheme. You can notice that there are two main parts in this regulation called the RTG. First, the new construction part, the new building part, and second, the existing building part. For the new construction, it provides a set of performance thresholds below which it will be no longer possible to build. And for the existing building part, it reveals the performance of buildings with the idea that the performance becomes a real determinant of the value of the assets in the for sale or lease in the market. The whole scheme is compliant with the EPBD directive, which provides a European framework for both parts of the regulations. And then we have additional text with feasibility studies and inspection of systems related to HVAC. So please memorize a few abbreviations I will use frequently later. RTG is the name of the new building part regulation. DPEG will be the name of the existing building part, and we'll also frequently use RTA ADEME, which is the name of the previous regulations published by the French state. Okay, next slide, please. So let's start with the technical foundations of the regulations. In a technical perspective, and also in our tropical climate, there's a fundamental set of rules that underlies the regulations, which is what we consider as the key performance factors for the buildings. This sketch illustrates this concept. So first key factor is the protection from solar radiation, sun control, use of masks, eaves, shutters, and so on. Very important, probably the most important. The second point is very important to try to live without air conditioning by using the comfort provided by natural ventilation, airflow. Orientation, windows openings are very important. The third point is if cooling is necessary, it's important to cool the building with the lowest energy consumption as possible. So I'm talking about high efficiency conditioning systems and also performance of the envelope, like tightness of windows. The fourth key point is the importance to reduce the demand on the electrical grid by the use of renewables, photovoltaic production or the HW production. Okay, next slide, please. Let's talk about for the new construction part, we incorporated the previous key factors into the regulations, and we obtained a new set of rules that are policy fundamentals. So these are new housing. For the new housing, we must prioritize the comfort without relying on the use of air conditioning. So every new housing must be comfortable without air conditioning, no matter if there is or there is not air conditioning inside. This is the first rule that we decided. The second one was, however, air conditioning is not prohibited. It's allowed as long as energy consumption is kept to a minimum. Now, as far as new commercial buildings are concerned, it's a bit different. The first point is to be air conditioning efficient, because air conditioning is hardly unavoidable. For all new constructions, the electricity grid will provide less than 50% of the HW needs. Oh, there's a problem with the slideshow.
Yeah. I'm trying to share my screen again. Sorry for.
So whether it's housing or commercial buildings, at least half of the HW needs come from renewables. It's mandatory. So, and photovoltaic production is not directly included in the assessment of new projects, but it can improve the DPEG score for the existing building only. So DPEG, this is another abbreviation to memorize. DPEG is the Building Energy Performance Diagnostic of Guadeloupe for existing building. Next slide, please. Now, I must introduce the concept of what we call the performance regulations, because there are two types of regulations. The first one is the means-based regulation, and RTE ADEME, the previous regulation, is a means-based obligation. The principle of a means-based regulation is that these regulations impose specific characteristics for each building component. The advantage of this kind of regulation is very simple. It's just a list, a set of rules, rather technically easily to apply, but complicated for the design exercise. On the other hand, we have the concept of the performance obligation. The principle is this regulation imposes an overall performance standard for the building, which leaves the choice of elementary solutions to the designer. So the main advantage is this freedom for the designer. And they say that the stakeholders prefer this kind of regulation because it's possible to optimize the cost of the construction with the same efficiency and performance. The difference, you understand the difference between these two kinds of regulations is in fact the scale. Obligation at the elementary component scale or at the whole building scale. But to understand this concept on the next slide, we will show you an example. Thank you. So let's take this example with RT ADEME on the left, which is a means-based regulation. We are obliged to impose threshold value, maximum value for solar factors for each kind of surface, such as walls, roof, windows, and so on. For the cross ventilation, there is a minimum opening ratio required for each orientation, as well as interior partitions. And there are also some prohibitions, like, for example, roof windows are prohibited because we know it's not a good, it's very bad for the efficiency. So it's completely prohibited. With, on the other side, with obligation, performance obligation, like RTG, you do what you want, provided that the overall performance is proven. So there is just one calculation with the two KPI I will present later. All right. Let's move on to the next slide. And I will explain how we reduced we decided to reduce the complexity of the regulation in Guadeloupe This pie chart shows that houses in blue, light blue, and red, collective housing in red, offices in green, retail in orange, account for together more than 80% of the construction flow, the new construction flow. So we decided to restrict the scope of the regulation to these three main types of building, which covers 87% of the new construction flow, but it reduces mainly the overall effort to make. So it's kind of a Pareto logic. And on the next slide, please. In the same idea, considering that the energy consumption of a building results of the performance of the building envelope and the performance of building energy systems, and also considering that these two factors are very different lifespans. We're talking about half a century for the building envelope and around about 1 decade for an energy system HVAC. So it's more important to regulate the building envelope than energy system. So we decided to contract mainly the building envelope and not HVAC, the building energy systems. But HVAC are included in a more simplified way in DPAG and the existing regulation, and the market is regulated. It's not possible to sell HVAC system with less than A+ class on the Guadeloupe territory. Right. I would like now to address the compliance test process. As you can see, so we have implemented a calculation method, and this method has been implemented itself in a software tool, online tool, that is widely used by the stakeholders and the professionals. As you can see in this process chart, there are 4 main steps. The first step is the professional the designer define the characteristic of the building by modeling the building in the software. The second step is the step of simulation. The calculation tool runs, and simulates the building's physical magnitudes, different magnitudes. Then on the third step, we calculate the values of the KPI, in line with the regulation. I will present this KPI later. And the last step of the process is the test of compliance, and the KPI must be under the threshold value to be compliant. Right? Now, the next slide. Let's have a look at these KPI. There are 3 KPI for ITG. I will present them to you. The first one is ICT. It means thermal comfort indicator. It's about the thermal comfort consideration for non-air conditioned mode. So it's expressed in degrees. The second KPI, BBO, means energy requirement indicator. It refers to energy efficiency of the building envelope. and it's expressed in kilowatt per square meter per year. And there is a third KPI for the HW called the PRDHW. It's about the energy consumption for domestic hot water, and it's expressed in percentage. Just these three KPI to quantify, to assess the compliance of the building. Then I propose to do a focus on the ICT KPI on the next slide, please. Because it's probably the most innovative KPI we have designed, especially for Guadeloupe. You can see the formula of ICT, and this formula used another secondary KPI called the T felt, which is the temperature felt by the inoccupant. And this is inspired by the Givoni psychometric diagram, and it takes into consideration the operative temperature, the relative humidity, and the airspeed. So if you want to go further in this way, there is a special technical sheet in the handbook. So I propose to continue with the next slide. There is another concept to introduce, which is the compliance condition, line with the compliance condition, because first of all, the compliance condition was based on the relative method. So the test was the real project must be more performant than the reference project. So what is the reference project? The reference project is in fact a virtual building which we have reconstructed from the real building by replacing some of its characteristics by with a regulatory reference value taken from RTE for each part of each component of the building. But this is done automatically by the software. So it's very easy to build. So I explained it to you. The user models is building, it creates a real project. The software generates the reference project, and each one is simulated, and the real project must beat the reference project. So this logic was used from 2010 until 2019, and in 2020, you can see on the next slide, we switched to another logic, which is an absolute condition. So the reference project disappears, and there is just a very single rule to satisfy on the left-hand side with the threshold values. Almost static values, but not exactly, but almost constant values. And this can be done only when you have very heavy feedback from the regulations and the results of the different simulations of the project. And we had to wait almost 10 years to do it. And this is a best method, a better method. Because now the architecture, the shape of the building is taken into consideration in the score. And before it was not the case. It's a bit complicated to understand why, but believe me, it's a real progress to switch to this kind of regulation, but it requires a very good knowledge of the building stock. All right, I think we can Go to the next chapter. The next session is about action on existing buildings. And for existing buildings, the Regional Council of Guadeloupe made 3 main decisions at the beginning. First of all, it's a fact that the retrofitting rate in Guadeloupe is too low. So it was not a good idea to constrain the retrofit with another regulations. So it was decided not to develop a regulation on the act of retrofitting. But instead of this, the disclosure of the building performance through energy performance certificate, DPG, was decided because it's some kind of hidden characteristic of the building. And the idea was to disclose it as requested by the European directive, which and the objective is to encourage energy retrofit, but not to constrain it by using the real estate market mechanism. The third point is that by the use of the simulation method, the simulation tools, and so on, we can generate a lot of data about the building stock. And we decided to establish an observatory for energy and climate, feed by all these data generated by the regulation tools. And we have thousands of buildings very well described now in this observatory. Very useful for decision making for public policy. The energy performance DPG, the energy performance diagnostic of Guadeloupe, is formalized by a certificate, building energy performance certificate. As you can see on this picture, there are 3 pages on this document. This document is automatically generated from the RTG DPG app online software. Downloadable and printable. It's a PDF document with these 3 pages. On the page 1, you can see in the red frame the energy label, energy scale, which is the most important part of the document. The letter, in fact, is the most important level, and also a bunch of information about the building itself. On the second page, it's in fact in a multi-criteria analysis that provides information about advantage and limitations of the building for each part of the building. To understand, in fact, the overall performance of the building. And in the third the document, the diagnostician is invited to write some recommendations, to propose a recommendation for retrofitting or for the uses itself of the building to reduce the consumption. Next slide on for the use of for the generation of this certificate. There is another KPI introduced in the calculation method, which is ICE KPI, Energy Consumption Indicator. It, in fact, it expresses a simulated energy consumption, but not with the entire electricity uses. They are just air conditioning, DHW, lighting, ventilation, as simulated by the method and the software. And we make a partial deduction of solar electric production, if any. It's important to say that this calculation is made with the same method and software as the new construction. The two methods are the same, exactly the same. The two simulation methods. Right? So next chapter deals with the implementation tools. I would like to address first the simulation core of the method, calculation method, which contains, as you can see in this chart on the right-hand side, there are three main cores in this core. The first engine is the thermal engine that quantifies temperature and cold needs. The second core is the natural ventilation engine that quantifies the speed of airflow inside the building. And this is a real innovation we've made for Guadeloupe, specifically designed for RTG. It's a compromise between simplicity and precision, suitable for regulation, because we're talking about airflow, and it's a very complicated topic in general to simulate. And the third engine is a solar system engine that quantifies the amount of DHW locally produced. So all this is from the global core engine, which is 1 hour time step dynamic simulation core. We can move on to the next slide. I will show you a typical screen of the software where we have implemented this calculation method. You can see on the left-hand side the modeling of the building by objects like areas, walls, windows, equipment, structured in a tree structure. You can create different objects to modelize the building. And for each of these objects, on the right-hand side, you have a form to be filled by the professional. Then, yes, very important to tell you that this software, you can freely test it online. Here is the address, the URL. You can use it and test it freely. It's open for everybody. A little bit about the consultation process. And first of all, I want to highlight that the capacity for consultation is a real strength of small territories like us and like you, compared to a big country like France. Because of the proximity between decision makers and professionals. This is a real strength. So the consultation process has been very efficient in Guadeloupe. Let me explain how we did it. It's organized through different iterative sessions. And here is a process chart of the typical session. Typical session starts with a survey. Then 1 week before the session, we send a general document to the professionals with the different topics to be discussed in the session. Then happens the session. It's a discussion forum. and we exchange, we talk, we gather our views and opinions. After the session, there is a decision made by the Regional Council of Guadeloupe, which takes into consideration the different opinions expressed during the sessions. And then we communicate the results of the conclusion and the decision papers to the professionals. There are a lot of topics to be discussed in consultation, but there are some topics more important. I would say these 5 topics are really important. We talked a lot about them. First of all, the text themselves, the regulatory laws, how the texts are written. The calculation method, the design of the calculation method, and the design of the calculation software, and also insight from practical experience coming from the professional. Very interesting to improve the regulatory system. And at last, the big problem of compliance with the regulations. I'm talking about respect of the regulation by all the professionals. This is the hard point. Now, I would like to address the question of the resource. We offered 2 professionals in line with the regulations. So there is an open access online calculation software. Talked about it before. Then we created a practical book that complements the regulatory text. It's a heavy document, about 150 pages, with a lot of details how to apply the regulations for design offices, architects, and so on. Then there is a technical support with a help desk by hotline, where everybody can ask a question. And it's a good way to provide solution to specific issues, rather to complexify the regulation itself. It works very well. Professional training, including training days, technical workshops, private training sessions for different profile of professionals. And at last, the accreditation of the DPHG diagnosticians, very important task to do. This accreditation assessment ensures a certain level of skill and knowledge for the diagnosticians. In Guadeloupe, there are about 30 diagnosticians for the whole territory certified. The question of the compliance, the overall compliance with regulations is probably the hardest task for us. It's very complicated, very difficult. It's a long-term effort. And we used 4 levels of action. First of all, the incentive to promote exemplary building. It's about providing financial aid to exemplary buildings, very efficient buildings. The second level of action is the control. With at the stage of the building permits, already an automatic control from the app, the software, because the architect must download an attestation certificate from the software to prove that the building at this stage is already compliant with RTG regulation. So this is efficient, but there is also a control after the construction of the building itself, a final control, and this is not made by the Regional Council of Guadeloupe, but by the French state. It's more complicated because it's made on the basis of a sample, but two short sample of buildings. Then we have the sanctions and penalties. Once again, this level of action is defined by the National Construction Code, so by the state, the French state itself, and proposes penalties that are unfortunately disproportionate to the act, too heavy, in fact. So they are never applied, and so it's a bit ineffective. And then we have the level of action of communication. We use it a lot. It's embodied by information campaigns targeted by different profiles of users or public officers. And the main objective is to make the LTG known, the awareness of LTG. And our feedback is that all this is complicated. It's a huge effort. It's a long-term effort. It's never finished. So hard part of the system. Yes, we propose you this slide also with the impact of LTG. What is the impact of LTG 10 years after on the construction sector? Let's say that the first impact is on buildings themselves. On buildings themselves, we introduced the concept of bioclimatic design in line with natural ventilation, in line with solar protection. As you can see on the drawing on the left-hand side, this kind of building, we cannot build it anymore in Guadeloupe. It's no more possible. It looks like, the left-hand side, it looks like how we build in French mainland. So in other climates. So it's no more possible to do it. Now the construction looks rather like the picture on the right-hand side with efficient solar protections and renewables. There's also an interesting impact on professionals because there has been a real rise of collective competence around sustainable construction practice, and also interesting for harmonization of this practice to ensure consistency in building energy efficiency across the industry. It's very interesting for the growth of all the industry. And we arrive to the conclusion. I would say that as you have seen, this kind of regulation construction is a long-term task, and it requires careful consideration. I've talked a lot about bioclimatic design, which is an important fact. Technically, also the importance of being able to measure the performance itself, very important. And our wishes through this handbook is effectively help your reflection on direction of your own energy policy. And in this last slide, I show you the content of the whole handbook that will be soon available with 30 pages guide with the same, almost the same structure as this today's presentation, but much more detailed. You will find also a set of didactic sheets which are focused on the technical points or organizational points. If you want to go further, and if you want to go further, also a set of 30 reference documents, which are PDF documents or interesting web links for further reading. And that's it. I finished this presentation. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bertrand. So I think that we can say that the elements that have been presented will be very helpful for the Caribbean decision makers and the stakeholders. And I think that this feedback from Guadeloupe was very interesting. So as Mr. Bertrand said, if you want to know more, handbook will be available very soon, I mean next week, where we can find, you will find, sorry, several tips, advice on how our Caribbean partners can create energy efficiency buildings policies based on Guadeloupe experience. So don't hesitate to download next week this handbook. We were also, as I said before, able to have the feedback from Guadeloupe, but I think it's very important to have a deep insight of what is at stake in the Caribbean in terms of the building context, and also what are the tools that are in place to increase more energy efficient, the construction of more energy efficient buildings. So our next speaker, Dr. Curtis Boodoo, will answer these questions. And I hand over to you, and thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Raïssa. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I would also like to thank the previous speakers, especially the previous speaker, for highlighting the excellent work that Guadeloupe has been doing as it relates to energy efficiency in building. Guadeloupe is certainly a leader in the region as it relates to this field. As Raïssa mentioned, my presentation today would be more for the general OECS region, particularly the English-speaking OECS. I will be sharing some results from 3 studies that would have been done in the region and try to tie in the importance of energy efficiency, especially as it relates to buildings. So can you go on to the next slide? Thank you. So I wanted to start, first of all, looking at the energy consumption we have for a selected few OECS member states, and this is the historical energy consumption. Naturally, you see this growth in energy consumption. And this growth, of course, follows a growth in population. It follows a growth in urbanization of these particular countries, and also a growth as it relates to industrialization. You would see that for the sample of countries I have here, Antigua and Barbuda and St. Lucia, high users of energy. They are also countries with a high GDP per capita, or have one of the highest GDP per capita amongst the OECS English-speaking countries. So with greater economic activity, comes greater energy requirements, and this is what we are seeing. So we could expect, as economic activity increases in the region, or as these countries continue to develop their economic activities, the requirements for energy may steadily increase. Next slide, please. So as it stands, most of the energy for the OECS countries, especially the English-speaking OECS countries, is derived from fossil fuels. And again, for the sample of countries I have here, you could see the percentage of energy consumption derived from fossil fuels. This energy, most of it is imported. So we import our fossil fuels or hydrocarbons for energy consumption. And for a long time, the goal has been to decrease the importation of these fossil fuels, not only because of our climate commitments, but also from an economic standpoint. Next slide, please. Historically, the energy efficiency as it relates to the electricity sector has been improving over the years. Countries in the region have been investing in more energy efficient power generators, again, mainly fossil fuel generators, but we have seen an incremental increase in the efficiency as it relates to power generation. So we would now begin to focus on energy efficiency as it relates to the building sector. Next slide, please. There are many initiatives within the OECS region that look at addressing the importation of fossil fuels. There's a lot of investment in renewable energy. As it relates to transportation, we are also looking at electric vehicles as well. And the role of energy efficiency, of course, is not to be underestimated. It is one of the first steps you should make as it relates to cutting your energy consumption. And given that we are focusing on green technologies or transitioning the energy transition, which not only relates to the power sector, but with buildings and transportation, there's opportunity for the region as well. There's opportunity for economic activity or increased economic activity as we move towards these technologies. There's an opportunity for training and job creation. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I will be focusing on 3 studies that would have been applied to the region. And this is the takeaway from one of them. It looks at the priority areas as it relates to energy efficiency in buildings. And the study asks for a priority in lighting, air conditioning, and the use of electrical appliances. It also highlights the significance of the tourism sector in the OECS, and especially as it relates to making or enhancing the energy efficiency of the tourism sector. And it also highlights that there's quite a number of service sectors within the region when you also look at government buildings that can benefit from energy efficiency gains. Next slide, please. This is the second of 3 studies that I wanted to share. This study was highlighted earlier on as one of the ETC outputs. This study actually looked at 31 buildings among 3 countries within the OECS to identify some of the energy performance improvements. And if you focus on the percentages, you could see that almost 84% of the buildings that were involved in this study could benefit from the use of renewable energy. There is an argument that the cost of renewable energy is high, and this is a costly intervention, but we'll discuss that further. 77% of the buildings could benefit with the inclusion of a ceiling fan, in addition to the AC air conditioning. On that topic of cooling, you could see temperature set points as being a recommendation. You're working your way down the list, you could see roof insulation, or the sites that were visited could most definitely benefit from better roof installation as it relates to cooling. solar shading of windows as well. And as I said, the previous speaker would have also talked about in Guadeloupe how these different areas were focused on as well. So a lot of from the study and the site visits, you could see that there is a lot of opportunity for improving energy efficiency, especially as it relates to cooling. Next slide, please. There are a number of policy interventions and policies specific to energy efficiency for OECS countries, and this graphic covers a few of the OECS countries. So you can see that a popular policy tool or a popular incentive has been tax reduction. So member states would have implemented some sort of tax reduction or reduction of import duties on energy efficient technologies. So it could be energy efficient EC units, energy efficient lighting. So that has of course is a popular intervention. There are quite a number of demonstration projects throughout the OECS member states, and it's a popular tool that has been used to really illustrate the effects or to bring to the ground level the effects of energy efficiency. So it is a popular measure. In addition to the tax incentives, of course, the vehicle for these tax incentives would be VAT and sales tax reduction or zero rating of VAT and sales tax for energy efficient equipment. There are financing instruments that some member states would have implemented, but I must say from what I have seen that this is an area that quite a number of these studies are asking for improvement. Next slide, please. So this is the third study that I am extracting information from. And this study nicely summarized some of the barriers as it relates to energy efficiency that we would have seen in the region. So I guess the talking point should be, is our policy interventions matching these barriers? And I would say yes, mostly it mostly does match the barriers, and the barriers that we have for energy efficiency are very much similar to the barriers that we have for the other areas of clean technology, renewable energy, electric vehicles, etc. And a major barrier is this access to financing or the ability to finance energy efficient technologies, which can be a bit more expensive or costly than the technologies that the energy inefficient technologies that we would traditionally use. And it is, of course, based on the very small markets that these the member states represent as individual countries. Things cost more, especially when your market is small, and this is something that has also been highlighted as a barrier. This study recommends the establishment of ESCOs or energy service companies, and especially ESCOs that are encouraged, at least in the first phase, by the government or by the state. There is also a recommendation for certification and standard schemes as it relates to energy efficiency or the adoption of them. And there is also a recommendation for public buildings to ensure that, for public sector, to ensure that you lead from the front, that you conduct energy audits regularly, that you comply to energy efficient building codes and standards. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. That's my presentation. I look forward to the discussions that follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boodoo. So we could see that there are a lot of opportunities for the Caribbean building sector in terms of different solutions, such as you said before, implement audits, establish technical standards, and so on. but also in terms of job creation. Moreover, on this matter, we have with us Mrs. Barnier, who is the, the manager of the Green Affaires Antilles Guyane company. And she will also be able to, to speak to us about the impact of the building energy efficiency regulation in Guadeloupe for the stakeholders, companies, and how this policy improve the techniques of construction in Guadeloupe and in terms of project management. So I hand over to you, Mrs. Barnier, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Raïssa. So today I'm going to share with you my feedback about the practices of construction professionals. First, let me remind you about the main objectives of a building energy efficiency regulation for a territory in the Caribbean. First, to improve comfort in natural ventilation as we have regular winds and no winter. Second, limit energy bills for people and limit the impacts of rising costs, such as we are currently experiencing. Third, reduce territorial energy independence. As Mr. Boodoo told us, we all still use a lot of fossil fuels in the Caribbean. And for the last point, fight climate change by limiting the release of carbon from the use of fossil fuels. As previous speakers have explained to you, we now have a building energy efficiency regulation in Guadeloupe, but the road has been long. There were intermediate steps, and I'm going to tell you how it affected the management of construction projects. I've broken it down into 4 main phases. Let's talk about the first period. It was before 2009. No.
Sorry.
Okay. Perfect. No French building energy efficiency regulations are applicable in our latitudes. Caribbean climate zone is not integrated into metropolitan regulations, and building energy efficiency regulations are mainly focused on limiting heating consumption. As shown in the photo as a blink of an eye, we don't have winter, we don't have snow on our beaches, so we don't have heating in our houses. So during this period, energy efficient practices are subject to the goodwill of the project owners or architects. Limiting investment costs takes precedence over limiting energy consumption. Engineering design offices are requested late or even not at all on projects. So they are only able to make very few recommendations about the building itself, orientations, insulation, choice of materials, etc. They are often able to make recommendations on equipment only. We have seen very few integrations of renewable energies as solar output productions, and sometimes it was on unsuitable architecture. At the end, we have seen few energy efficient operation despite some of good practices in housing resulting from traditional architecture. Now let's talk about the second period between 2009 and 2011. We got RTAA done, the first building energy efficiency regulation adapted to our territory. The name is in French, so I think I don't have to translate it, sorry. But this regulation concerned housing only. RTAA is a regulation with means-based obligation. Its application is relatively simple and remains mainly the responsibility of architects. Project optimization remains very, very limited, and the additional costs generated are significant. The engineering design offices are little used, so the engineering costs are limited, but invests are not optimized, and the additional costs are significant. Only housing operations are impacted by change of this practice. Now let's talk about the third period between 2011 and 2020. The RTG is finally born and is applicable for new types of buildings, such as commercial or tertiary. RTAA is still available for housing operation, so project leaders can choose the RTAA if necessary. Let's talk about the RTG. The application for new construction requires a certification level 2. So there is a need for a certified professional on every project, but we see an increase in skills of technical stakeholders. The quality of studies is guaranteed. The application of RTG is the responsibility of the project owner. So they are involved in the energy subjects by contracting with specialized and engineering technical officers. Project owners finally make energy efficient investments, but engineering costs increase. The RTG is a regulation with performance obligation, so the choices made for the building can be optimized to get the compliance. We finally get energy efficient buildings with limited additional costs. I admit there is an engineering cost, but they are much, much lower than the additional costs on buildings. Architects do not always have the ability to monitor the compliance of their operation themselves and therefore rely on specialized ETOs. ETOs are involved from the start of the project, and there's a real synergy between architects and ETOs. I show you a little example of a technical optimization of a project. It's in French, sorry. It's about the construction of a house. The first column is the initial project. It was not in accordance with the regulation. So we tried several solutions: roof insulation, light colors on the wall, more opening, etc., etc. And we finally found a solution with roof insulation and light colors on the wall. So let's talk about the first period. So it's since 2020. There have been changes with the RTG between 2011 and 2020, but they did not affect the management of construction projects. But in 2020, I must say that there was a little revolution. Obligations and procedures were modified, deeply modified. Certification is no longer required to use the platform in the new building version, to carry out studies of new buildings, to edit certificates of conformity, and to edit the Energy Performance Certificate, DPEG. A wide panel of professionals can now apply the RTG: architects, technical staff or general companies, home builders, designers, etc., etc. But on the other side, studies can be made by unprofessional people, and they are not always reliable. There is another big change about the building permit. It is now required to perform the calculation before the building permit deposit. A certificate of owner is no longer enough. The regulatory audit is carried out at the outset of the project. There is less risk of having a non-compliant project in the advanced design phases. An interim and energy performance certificate, DPEG, is now edited at the start of the construction. The client knows the expected performance before the construction starts. The certificate is provided whether air conditioning or not, in accordance with the practices of notaries and real estate agency. A certificate is provided for each housing, which is more logical for the clients, but for everyone and the state, and more in accordance with the practices of notaries and real estate agency. Normally, to be truly compliant with the regulation, a final energy performance certificate, DPAG, has to be edited at the end of the construction. But I must say that few project owners will consider it necessary to have the conformity checked at the end of the projects. The practice itself has evolved. The RTG is more challenging as a regulation. The approach is now 100% linked to performance. Compliance is more difficult to achieve and requires implementing energy-efficient construction practices. But sometimes finding solutions to the non-compliance is not always obvious to ensure the financial balance of the transaction. Now is my conclusion about all this. So this regulation, the RTG, is adapted to our territory. Bioclimatic good construction practices are more and more widely disseminated. Engineering costs associated with the regulatory calculation are controlled, and additional construction costs are controlled as well. I must say that the RTG is generally known, accepted, and respected. The project promoters can now offer comfortable facilities with reasonable energy bills, resilience and adaptation to shortages, and a positive environmental footprint. So the projects will be more attractive, and we all know that if the operation is attractive, it's possible to increase rents and sell prices. But the road is not over. Here are some ideas which could help to go further. Regularly involve regulations towards more requirements. Create BBC type energy labels based on RTG. BBC means, in French, bâtiment basse consommation. That means low energy consumption building. And create regulations dedicated to building renovation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Barnier. I do love your accent, by the way. So let's switch in French because we spend the whole time in English. Donc, nous arrivons à la fin de ce webinaire. Donc, comme on vous l'a écrit dans le chat, si vous avez des questions sur les présentations qui ont été présentées, n'hésitez pas à poser vos questions dans le chat. Donc, on vous laisse quelques minutes.
So I will switch now to French. As we said at the beginning of the webinar, you are free to ask questions in the chat as well, in English or in French. So please go ahead, and we will give you a few minutes so that you can ask your questions.
Alors, donc, pour ceux qui ont demandé si c'est normal que les échanges soient en anglais, donc vous n'étiez pas là au début de la présentation du webinaire. Donc, nous avons eu quelques difficultés techniques. Donc, les échanges étaient en français et en anglais. Là, nous avons des interprètes, voilà, donc qui réalisent une interprétation consécutive. Donc, vous pouvez toujours poser vos questions en français et en anglais, et dans tous les cas, on vous répondra soit en français, soit en anglais, mais il y aura les interprètes.
So for those who ask whether it's normal that the presentations were in English, I'm letting them know, probably they were not here with us at the beginning of the webinar. It's due to technical difficulties that we weren't able to provide simultaneous interpretation, but some of the interventions were in French and in English, and we have two interpreters who are providing consecutive interpretation. So you can ask your questions in English or in French, and the responses will come in English or French, but we will have translations for them.
Donc, nous avons une question pour Madame Barnier. Donc, c'est Karine Rolla de la DEAL de Martinique qui vous demande qu'est-ce que cela veut dire que la certification n'est plus obligatoire.
We have a question to Madame Barnier. The asker is Karine Rolas from Martinique. And the question is, what does it mean that you don't need, that the certificates are no longer compulsory?
Je pense que vous évoquez la certification niveau 2 qui était obligatoire en RTG version 1 et 2. C'est-à-dire que pour pouvoir réaliser des calculs en construction neuve, donc vous pouvez avoir le droit, entre guillemets, d'utiliser l'outil, d'éditer des attestations de conformité, les bureaux d'études, parce que essentiellement les bureaux d'études devaient passer une certification dite niveau 2, avec délivrance d'un certificat. Et aujourd'hui, ce n'est plus le cas, au moins pour la construction neuve. Reste uniquement une obligation de certification pour les diagnostiqueurs immobiliers qui interviennent sur la construction existante pour réaliser en particulier des DPEG. Mais aujourd'hui, réaliser des études en construction neuve est ouverte à tous. La plateforme qui a été présentée par M. Bertrand est accessible à tous. Donc, tout le monde peut se lancer dans les calculs. C'est pour ça que j'évoquais éventuellement des soucis de réalisation des simulations. Ce choix a été fait par la région Guadeloupe pour vraiment démocratiser l'utilisation de la réglementation. Et des garde-fous sont mis, mais M. Bertrand pourra en parler mieux que moi, sont mis en place sur la plateforme pour que les calculs restent quand même cohérents, même si aujourd'hui, on essaie de former encore plus de gens pour de meilleurs résultats.
So, I think that what you are referring to is for the level 2 certificates, which were compulsory in the RTG version 1 and 2. That was for the study offices, which was that they needed to have that certificate, but today it's no longer needed. We are currently in the process has changed, and now it's in the construction of new buildings where it's in the diagnostic period where this would be necessary, but the new platform that Mr. Bertrand presented is accessible for all, which serves the purpose that was also our intention to democratize this process. But I think it's Mr. Bertrand who can share more information about that.
Alors, nous avons une autre question de Brinan. Peut-on obtenir la documentation en français?
We have another question from Brinan. Can we obtain documentation in French as well?
Donc, oui. Alors, donc, déjà, comme l'a présenté Monsieur Bertrand, nous avons réalisé un guide de retour d'expérience sur la RTG, donc qui sera disponible le 19 mai sur le site internet du projet TEC, donc www.tec-interreg.com. Et vous pouvez également aller sur le site de Guadeloupe Énergie, donc www.guadeloupe-énergie.com, où il y a toute la documentation attrait à la RTG en français. Concernant le guide, le guide de retour d'expérience, je précise, il sera en anglais et en français.
So yes, as Mr. Bertrand also said in his presentation, we have this guidebook, this handbook on the feedback experiences of that will be published on the 19th of May on our website, and you will be able to download it from. There are two either the website of the Guadeloupe region and also I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the exact links, but I'm sure that. Raïssa can put it in the chat as well. And you will be able to access all the information in English and in French.
Donc, nous avons une question de Julien à Monsieur Bertrand. Je ne vois pas complètement toute la question, excusez-moi.
Ouais.
Donc, outre les aspects purement techniques, quels ont été les moyens déployés pour créer une nouvelle réglementation contraignante, mais acceptée par les professionnels souvent réfractaires au changement de leurs pratiques?
Je vais répondre en français. Hein. Si on enlève les aspects techniques, tout est basé sur le process de concertation, qui a été quand même assez fréquent. Il y a eu beaucoup de changements, vous avez vu dans la première frise chronologique, un peu toutes les étapes, il y a eu beaucoup d'étapes avec beaucoup de changements dans le dispositif réglementaire. Et tout ça a été décidé de concert avec les professionnels. Donc, au bout d'un certain temps, l'attitude des professionnels a un petit peu changé, puisqu'au début, ils ne savaient pas trop quel a été le mode de concertation. Et puis, avec le temps, ils se sont rendus compte que c'était une vraie concertation, qu'on les écoutait, qu'on prenait en considération leurs problèmes, qu'ils pouvaient suggérer des améliorations. Pas toujours, ça marche pas toujours, ça passe pas toujours, mais en tout cas, il y a une très forte écoute des professionnels. Et ça, petit à petit, déjà le dispositif réglementaire s'est amélioré. On l'a un peu débugué par rapport au retour terrain. Et puis la relation entre le pouvoir politique, les décideurs, nous et les professionnels a évolué avec le temps. Il y a une confiance qui s'est mise en place. Donc, c'est vraiment la concertation qui est à l'origine de cet état d'esprit qui est très bon actuellement. J'ai vu vraiment un changement en 10 ans, hein, ça a été vraiment très significatif.
So just to sum up the question, so besides the purely technical aspects, what were the means that were deployed to put in place a new regulation, mandatory regulation, which was also accepted by the professionals who are often against any changes in their everyday practice? So the answer to this is there have been many changes in the regulation, as you have seen in the chronological freeze in the beginning of my presentation. We have actually discussed many times with the professionals before taking decisions, and with the evolution of time, basically they realized that this was a real consultation. So in the beginning, they might have been a bit hesitant or maybe didn't have the full amount of trust, but by the end, they realized that they were able to make suggestions, and their suggestions were taken into account sometimes to make improvements. So actually the regulations have become much better, and also through this method we have managed to set up a very good and trust-based relationship with the stakeholders and the professionals in the sector.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, nous avons une question de Monsieur Blaise Alain. Je pense que cette question s'adresse à toi, Lionel. Peut-on utiliser la porte soufflante pour la perméabilité à l'air en complément de la RTG? Donc, il parle d'infiltrométrie.
Alors, la perméabilité à l'air, c'est un facteur qui compte en climat tropical, mais qui ne compte pas autant qu'en métropole, où l'impact est beaucoup plus important sur la performance énergétique. Donc, on n'est pas allé jusqu'à déployer ou encourager ce genre de pratique, parce que ça a un coût quand même, hein, de faire des essais de ce type-là. On en est à promouvoir des solutions un peu type, des solutions constructives un peu type, surtout au travers des baies et des vitrages. C'est en général là qu'il y a des problèmes d'infiltration. Mais oui, effectivement, on n'utilise pas ce genre d'essai aujourd'hui en Guadeloupe. C'est un peu surdimensionné par rapport à l'enjeu. Il faut rester quand même conscient que c'est un facteur secondaire, quand même, la perméabilité à l'air.
So a question regarding infiltrations and air permeability. The answer is that in tropical climate, this has less of an impact than in a big city environment. Also, these are pretty expensive tests, so we are actually testing them currently. However, we consider that it might have been, or it might be actually too much for Guadeloupe to go to the full length of these tests and examinations currently.
Thank you. So next question is for Dr. Boodoo. So the Caribbean islands seem to have an issue of controlling their energy consumption. What could be the gateway to exchange our expertise and make companies work together on this matter?
Donc, une question pour Monsieur Boodoo. Les îles de la Caraïbe semblent avoir une vraie problématique de maîtrise de leur consommation énergétique. Quelles pourraient être les portes d'entrée pour échanger nos expertises et faire les entreprises travailler ensemble à ce sujet?
Doris, are you here with us? Okay. I don't think. Oh. Donc, Docteur Boodoo nous a malheureusement quittés. Donc, du coup, on va passer à la prochaine question.
So, Mr. Boodoo is probably not with us anymore, so we will pass to the next question.
Donc, c'est une question de Marielle. Est-ce que l'impact positif de la RTG a pu être quantifié depuis sa création en gain énergétique, par exemple, pour les secteurs concernés, résidentiels, tertiaires?
A question from Marielle. Has the positive impact of the RTG regulation been quantified since its creation in terms of energetic gain, for example, for the sectors in question, for example, the residential or the tertiary sectors?
Je peux dire un petit mot là-dessus. C'est un sujet sur lequel il nous faudrait conduire une étude particulière que nous n'avons pas encore fait. On voit effectivement les résultats fondus dans un ensemble de politiques publiques qui ont été déployées dans le même pas de temps. On a mis en place des dispositifs pour sortir le chauffe-eau électrique, pour renouveler les équipements les plus énergivores et dans le même temps, mis en place cette réglementation thermique qui change petit à petit toutes nos constructions existantes et les rénovations. Donc, tout cela est fondu dans un ensemble qui nous fait constater effectivement que la performance énergétique progresse, mais c'est la confluence de tout cela pour pouvoir dissocier précisément qu'est-ce qui relève de la RTG ou pas. Je pense que c'est faisable, ça ne doit pas être aisé, mais effectivement, il nous faudrait à un moment faire une étude spécifique pour mesurer précisément l'impact de cette politique publique.
So the answer is that this would be a topic for a separate study. It has not been examined so far separately. The truth is that there were several different public policies that we have mentioned in the beginning, which together with the RTG led to the result that we saw that energy performance is actually getting better. However, we cannot identify which parts of this improvement is due to which policy or which regulation, and we cannot identify what caused what in these results. So it could and should be measured in a separate way.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, nous n'avons pas d'autres questions. Donc, je vous propose de conclure ce webinaire avec la présidente de la commission énergie, Madame VANOUKIA, qui va nous dire quelques mots.
So we do not have any further questions. Thank you for your attention, and we will conclude this session with a few closing remarks from the President of the Energy Commission, Madame VANOUKIA.
Dans un premier temps, j'adresse toutes mes félicitations à Marine, Marie-Charlotte de l'ADEME et Raïssa, EUSTACHE, principalement Raïssa qui a su mener à bien ce webinaire, qui a su mener aussi les échanges. Et je tiens aussi à féliciter chaleureusement tous les participants de leur intérêt et leur engagement en faveur d'un avenir durable pour le développement de nos territoires. Ce que je souhaite, c'est que nous continuions dans cette dynamique, que nous continuions à créer des liens, à échanger, créer des liens même à l'échelle politique et surtout professionnelle. J'ai été ravie de ce webinaire. J'ai été ravie de voir qu'il y avait autant de participants. C'est qu'il y a vraiment un intérêt pour le développement durable de notre territoire. Merci à vous.
I would first like to congratulate Marine, Marie-Charlotte, and Raïssa in particular, for having organized this webinar so well and having led the exchange. I would also like to congratulate every participant for their interest and engagement for the safe and economic development of our territory. I wish that we continue this work to tie ties even closer, to continue the exchange, and to work together, cooperate on a political and professional level. I am extremely happy that this webinar was so popular and that I saw so many participants who connected and who partook in these exchanges. And I am very thankful for having been able to be here. So thank you very much for your attention. Thanks to everyone for this webinar.
Et je souhaiterais tout particulièrement remercier nos interprètes, Anna et Kathleen, qui ont su s'adapter aux difficultés techniques qu'on a pu rencontrer durant ce webinaire. Donc, merci encore pour vos services et pour votre collaboration sur ce webinaire.
And we would like to thank also our interpreters, Anna and Katalin, who adapted to the technical issues. So thank you for your adaptation and for your assistance during our webinar. And we would like to thank you for the opportunity.
Merci à tous les participants. Merci également aux intervenants. Et donc, comme on vous l'a annoncé en début de ce webinaire, donc, il y aura un autre webinaire qui sera sur la thématique de la performance énergétique des bâtiments dans la Caraïbe et des bâtiments tertiaires, je précise. Et nous avons aussi un webinaire très bientôt sur la géothermie dans la Caraïbe. Donc restez connectés, suivez-nous sur nos réseaux sociaux et puis on se dit au prochain webinaire.
I would also like to thank our presenters and participants. Don't forget that, as we mentioned at the beginning of our webinar, we will have a next webinar on the energy performance of the Caribbean construction sectors, especially the tertiary buildings, and the next webinar soon to be organized on the geothermic energy in the Caribbean. So let's keep in touch. Sign up to our social media websites, keep an eye on what we're organizing, and we hope to see you soon on one of our events.
Merci à tous et très bonne journée à tout le monde.
Thank you and have a great day.